Hello guys, welcome to Online Web Tutor presented by Procedural Connection team. I am Sanjay. Inside this video session guys, we are going to learn about complete guide for MySQLi functions. Basically, we can use MySQLi functions in two ways. First, called procedural way, and second, called object oriented way. So inside this tutorial, we will see only about how can we use MySQLi functions using procedural technique. So if I go to next slide, now inside this we have, as we know that we have several functions basically MySQLi connections provide, but in this tutorial we are going to use all these functions what we have listed here. Inside this video, we will see about connection of MySQLi with our PHP database, as well as we will make some query to get the data. We will get about the last inserted ID, and if we want to iterate over dataset, then we can iterate by using MySQLi fetch array. So inside this video, we are going to use step by step all these functions. So if I back to code editor, now this is the file actually we have made for this video, something called procedural.php. As we know that we can make database connectivity in MySQLi using two ways. The first way is something called, let's say, connection equal to simply MySQLi. Inside this we have to pass some parameter called host, something called the username, password, and the DB name. This is called the procedural way to connect MySQLi. Now if I again let's say that here connection equal to new MySQLi, and in the same way if we pass the parameter called host, user, password, DB name, so this is known as object oriented MySQLi connections. So in the next video we will see about this object oriented way, but inside this video we are going to see that how can we make use of procedural MySQLi. So if I get rid of this static statement and let's say PHP, inside this PHP tag I am to make our connection variable. So let's say connection equal to MySQLi. Now inside this MySQLi function we are going to pass out parameter, and firstly the host name. So let's say that I'm going to connect the database of our localhost PHP myadmin. So it should be localhost, username is something root, and password is something root, and the database we are going to use inside this video, if I back to here, and this is something called learn_codeigniter. If I copy that, go to our editor and pasting here our database name. So finally we have made the connection. Now the connection we have made right here about these credentials, if we want to check that this is a valid connection details or not, for that we will use our second function. So copy this, go to editor, and let's say that if MySQL error number, it will return the true and the false value. It will return true, it means that we have some error. So back to here, and to print the error details we are going to use called MySQL connect error. So copy this function, back to editor, and let's say print a, and if I get rid of this extra parenthesis, let's say that connection error colon, and I'm going to make use of this function called MySQLi connect error. Otherwise, if we want to print our connection details, so let's say otherwise if I use else block here, copy this print a, pasting it here, and let's say that I'm going to print this connection details. So if I save all these changes, back to our browser, and if I reload this page, and we have some error. If I back to code editor, and this is the function we have used to actually get the error status, and this is for printing the error messages. And for the connection we have used called, actually it should not be actually MySQLi, it should be MySQLi connect. I think that this should be the error of this page. So if I save all these changes, back to browser, reload this page, now as we can see that this is the data actually we got inside this page. So if I open view page source, and this is a MySQLi object. Inside this object, we have several keys, which basically indicates that we have successfully connected with our database. Let's say that if we get rid of this password, and as we know that these credentials are not valid credentials to connect with this database, back to browser, reload this page. Now we have error, and error is that connection error, access denied for user root @localhost. It means we have some invalid details inside this connection variable. So successfully, as we can see that this is all about to get about the error status, and this is to print about the error messages. And with the error messages, this is the value we have concatenated that. If I again go to browser, now as we can see that this is all about connection error, and we have concatenated this value with this MySQLi connect error message. Now if I again type root here, it means successfully we have valid connection. Now here as we can use, or if suppose we get some error, so we are going to use exit function after that. Let's say that we have a valid connection. Now we are ready to execute any particular query, either insert, select, update, delete after this if block. If I go to slide, now let's say that I'm going to use called MySQLi query function. So copy this function name, back to editor, and let's say that query equal to MySQLi query, and inside this we have to pass some parameters. And the first value we have to pass this connection variable. So if I copy this connection variable, pasting it here, and in the second we have to pass our query what actually we are going to execute. So let's say that we are going to select all the data from this DB table, and inside this database we have a table called books, and we want to get all the books from this table, and the table name is something called books. So copy this, back to editor, and let's say select all from this is our table name. So successfully we have written our query, and we are going to select all the details from this books table. So let's say that we are going to actually iterate over all these records. So before running through the loop, let's say that if you want to check that this query has some values or not, it means that it has selected or it has fetched some data from the table or not. So for that, we are going to use a function, and this is called MySQLi numRows. It will basically gives us the count of total number of records basically our dataset contains. So if I copy this function name, back to editor, and let's say print MySQLi numRows, and inside this I am to pass this query variable. So copy that and pasting it here. So if I make comment, so let's say it will give count of all the data inside dataset. So if I save all these changes, back to browser, reload this page, now as we can see that total equal to 3. It means that it fetched all the data from this books table and count that we have 3 rows. Now let's say that we are going to iterate over each row what actually we are getting from this books table. So back to editor. Now if I make comment of this line, and let's say that while equal to row, and this should be the query. So copy this, and we are going to use called MySQLi, and we have 3 functions available to iterate over our dataset. And something first, MySQLi fetch array. Inside this we have to pass our query variable. Now if we let's say print and let's say query, so save these changes, back to browser, reload this page. Now if I go to the Control U to get the source code, now inside this source code, as we can see, or simply we are getting all the objects basically provided by our query variable, but actually we want our data. So back to editor, and instead of query, if I copy this row, print to here, go to browser, reload this page. Now as we can see that we have all 3 rows what actually we are getting from our books table. Now this is how return dataset returns by MySQLi fetch array. Inside this we have called 0 index at the ID. At first index we have book name. At the second index we have called book email. So we have the key name as well as the index of that key. This is MySQLi fetch array. If we want to get rid of all these extra indexes from this array, so we have to use called MySQLi assoc. This is MySQLi fetch associative array. So if I save all these changes, back to browser, reload this page, now it has returned only the key name and the value. The key name and the value, no extra indexes of our specified keys. So if we want to get the value of each key inside our loop, so back to editor, if I comment this line and let's say that echo and something the keys we have something called ID, so let's say ID, and here we have a row and inside this row we have called ID as a key, and also inside the same array we have called book name, so book name, so if I make uppercase, so book name, and let's say row, and the key we have something called book underscore name. Now if I write br tag to separate all the data printing to the screen, save all these changes, back to browser, reload this page, now we have called ID equal to 1 and book name is cake PHP, book ID 2, and this is WordPress theme development, book ID 3, and we have code igniter tutorial. So this is the second function we have seen about getting about the data set. This is all about MySQLi fetch assoc, means associative. If I copy this line, in the first we have seen about MySQLi fetch array. So if I make comment of this line, in the second we have seen about MySQLi fetch associative. Now this time we are going to see about MySQLi fetch object. So if I save all these changes, comment this line, uncomment this line, back to browser, reload this page. Now if I get the source code of this page, now as we can see that instead of array, MySQLi fetch object basically returns the object of our data set. Now if we want to get the data from this object, so back to editor, comment this line, uncomment this line. Now this is all about getting the data from array. Now this time if we want to get the data, we have to use called the arrow operator. So row, arrow operator, and this is for the book name. Save all these changes, reload this page, and as we can see that all the data should be same while actually using by arrow operator. So if suppose that if we put some where condition to our query, let's say that we want all the details of ID3, so we have to use where condition right here inside this query. So let's say where ID equal to 3. So if I save all these changes, back to browser, reload this page, now we have details only of ID3. Let's say that we are going to insert one more row inside this books table. So how can we insert that? After inserting data, we want also the last inserted ID of that row actually we have inserted inside this table. So how can we make use of that? So right now we have only 3 rows inside this table. So if I back to editor, and let's say that we are going to execute this time a insert query. So I'm going to comment all these lines, so actually what we have written. So let's say that query equal to MySQLi query, and inside this the first parameter, as we know that we have to pass the connection variable, and in the second we have to write our insert query. So let's say that I'm going to define a separate variable for that. So insert query, and here I'm going to write insert query. So insert into table name is something called books, and we have to pass here as the column names. So if we back to our table, so the column we have called ID, book name, book email, and the book price. And remember, ID is the primary key. So book name, book email, and the book price value we have to specify inside this command. So let's say book name. The second column we have called book email, and the third column we have called book underscore price. and the value I'm going to specify, let's say values, and inside this values, the value I'm going to pass, let's say book name, and this is all about, let's say MySQLi tutorial, and the book email, let's say that inside single quotes abcdef@gmail.com, and the price, let's say dummy value equal to 100. Now this is the query actually I have written. So if I copy this insert query variable and pasting right here, so successfully as we are going to execute this query, and the row is actually inserted to our database. Now we also want to get about the last inserted ID of this row inside our table. So for that we are going to use a function something called MySQLi insert ID. So copy this function, go here, and let's say print let's say last data inserted at colon, and we are going to use called MySQLi insert ID and passing the connection name. So save all these changes, back to browser, reload this page. Now as we can see that last data inserted at the index 4, back to our table, reload this page, go at the top, and we have inserted the fourth row inside table. Now this is all about our insert query. Now let's say that we are going to execute this time update query, and I want to update, let's say ID 3, and this is the dummy email address. So we are going to make some live email address. So back to our code editor. If I make comment of this line, and let's say here update query, and if I write something, let's say that command, let's say update table name something called books set, and we have to set our values. So I want that book email equal to, let's say online web tutor hub at gmail.com, and also we have to specify about where condition. If we will not specify this where condition, then it will update all the book email with this email address. So let's ID equal to 3. Now this time we have to pass this variable inside this MySQLi query function. So copy that, pasting it here. Now again if I make comment of this line, back to our browser, reload this page. Now we didn't get any data, but if we back to our phpMyAdmin, reload this page, now as we can see that we have successfully actually updated our email address of row ID 3. Now let's say that this time we are going to execute our last query something called delete row from this table, and I want to delete about the second row from this table. So back to our code editor. Let's say that delete underscore query equal to, let's say delete from books where id equal to 2. If suppose we will not pass any where condition right here, then it will delete all the rows from this books table. Now finally we have to pass this variable inside this MySQLi query. Now if go here, reload this page, back to browser, and as we can see that the second row has been deleted from this table. So successfully guys, inside this video we had seen about all these functions what actually we have written here. And finally, if I want to copy this MySQLi close, basically this is used to close our connection. All we have done with our connection, and now at the final words we have to write MySQLi close, and inside this we have to pass the connection as the variable, so that the memory actually we have occupied for this connection variable. Now finally we have released that. And also if suppose let's say that we have or we queried about to get all the data from our database table, and we have stored something let's say inside this row variable. Now at the final, if we want to get rid of all the memory or release all the memory from our dataset, so for that we have to use the MySQLi function something called MySQLi free result. This is used to free the result dataset. If suppose back to editor, go here, and let's say that we have used here its connection, and here we have used something called row as a variable to store the data of this MySQLi fetch associative array. So finally, after executing this while loop, we have to make use of this MySQLi free result, and inside this we have to pass this variable, because at the final we are going to release our memory what actually we have occupied for this data set. So step by step guys, actually we have seen about making use of all these MySQLi function. Now in the next video we will see that how can we consume MySQLi function using our object oriented way. So inside this video session guys, if you went out, then please drop your comment. I will give my reply as soon as possible. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching and have a great day.